Welcome to everyone, especially people who may be new to our store. We're very happy to have Nasser Mohajer here to speak. He's the author of Voices of a Massacre, Untold Stories of Life and Death in Iran, 1988. This is a very important book and an important voice about great crimes committed against political prisoners in 1988, and it's extremely relevant right now when so many people from a new generation have been swept up into Iran's prisons. We welcome Nasser, who's a respected scholar and author who's written many books and been interviewed very widely in the media. I wanted to just say a few words about our store and why we're having this program. This is a rare time, a time when the US, a great citadel of world imperialism, is tearing apart from top to bottom. And internationally we see intensifying contention between nuclear-armed imperialist powers. This is a very dangerous time. The analysis of Babavekian, who's the revolutionary leader that we follow, is that something terrible or something truly emancipating could emerge out of this intense world conflict. This and the possibility that there could be a revolution that emerges out of this is at the heart of everything we do in our work at this bookstore. And it's this analysis and our approach to how do we seize on this is concentrated in these two documents that I encourage everyone to look at. This is one, We Are the Revcoms, and this other one is just released this week. We Need and We Demand, a Whole New Way to Live, a Fundamentally Different System. These documents are available here, and I encourage people to study them and get back to us about what they think. But in this situation, in this intense situation, which holds such divergent possible futures, what happens in Iran matters a great deal. Supporting the struggle to free Iran's political prisoners goes to the bedrock of what our store is about. We're not talking about having a revolution for people here who live in what is now the US. We're talking about a revolution that's about emancipating humanity. And we can't stand by when people anywhere face horrible oppression and rise up as well. So this is a fundamental point for us. But further, we have a situation in the world today where, along with the sharpening imperialist contention, a major feature of the world is that there are two retrograde, reactionary, outmoded forces that contend and clash with each other, and this significantly marks the international situation. On the one hand, there's imperialism, US imperialism in particular, that dominates the world and brings all this suffering and exploitation. On the other hand, there's a reactionary, retrograde, woman-hating religious fanaticism. In this case, in the case of Iran, Islamic fundamentalism. And we're faced with these two historically outmoded forces fighting to defend and perpetuate ways of organizing society that have long passed their expiration date. Both are cruel and exploitive, destructive of the environment, and there has to be another way the world can be. And there is another way the world can be. Support for the prisoners and the uprising of the people of Iran is a very important part of forging this other way. The main way we see this is that is in the new communism that Babavekian has brought forward. It lights a pathway for revolution around the world. And it's an important and inspiring fact that there is a force in the Communist Party of Iran, Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, that is taking this new communism up and applying it to change the world under very difficult conditions. So, just to end, everyone with a sense of justice should support the struggle of the political prisoners in Iran. And I've touched on some of the reasons that this is so close to our hearts at Revolution Books, and why we're so happy to have this event today. Thank you.
He's a scholar, he's a man of intellect, and he's someone who actually deeply goes to show us the truth. And this book particularly represents what exactly happened in the dungeons of Iran's prison. And I'm very happy, and on behalf of the Revolution Books and International Emergency Campaign, to welcome my dear Nasser Mohajer to the podium. Thank you.
The focus of this talk is the massacre of prisoners of conscience in Iran in the summer of 1988. It's going to offer an overview of this dark historical moment in the modern history of my country, its effects on the society and the evolution of political groupings which were hit by it, also on the careers of judicial officials and operatives who were at the heart of the executions. One of them, Hamid Nouri, I'm sure that we have heard of his name and have followed his trial to different degrees that is being held in Sweden, Stockholm. One of them, Hamid Nouri, an assistant to deputy prosecutor of the Gohardasht prison. Gohardasht is one of the main two prisons in the vicinity of Tehran. Has been tried in Stockholm's district court. Nouri is accused of murder and war crimes, offenses that can be prosecuted in a third country on the principle of universal jurisdiction. The talk would include with an epitome of the ongoing trial and an outline of Hamid Nouri's life, of course, if we have enough time. In the summer of 1988, thousands of political prisoners were summarily summoned, retried, and covertly executed inside prisons by the verdict of a special commission appointed by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. The executions started on July 28 in Tehran and appear to have stopped on September 4th of that very year. The carnage occurred within all major detention centers throughout the country. Some questions need to be addressed at the outset. Who were those killed in the summer of 1988? And why and when were they arrested and imprisoned? Under what pretext were they condemned to death? The majority perished were members of the People's Mujahideen Khalq organization. Other non-Orthodox Muslim detainees, and also a considerable number of leftists, communists, and pro-democracy activists affiliated with a variety of political groups and organizations. Almost all of those men and women from different ages and walks of life had participated in the revolution of 1979, which toppled the autocracy of Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi that evolved from the year 1980 onwards into a form of theocracy, or to be more precise, hierocracy, which featured the hegemonic position of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Almost all of these forces, especially the communists, had to face the hostility of the Islamic fundamentalists who were trying to marginalize and liquidate them, both during and after the February insurrection in 1979. Some of these forces were ardent supporters of Iranian Kurdish people, Turkmens, Baluchis, and other ethnic minorities in Iran. Almost all these forces were except the Communist Tudeh Party and the Organization of Iranian People's Fedai Majority, Aksariyat, went into opposition to the IRI, the Islamic Republic of Iran. By the summer of 1981, at the time in which the supporters of Khomeini brought an early end to the presidency of Abu Hassan Bani Sadr, who played an instrumental role, as you know, as you remember, during Khomeini's stay in Paris a few weeks after the revolution. They pursued a policy of Islamification of Iran and conducting the war with Iraq as a springboard to export the Islamic revolution and stabilizing a chaotic domestic situation. All of them were subject of the wrath of Ayatollah Khomeini, who openly propagated his anti-liberal, anti-democratic, and anti-communist beliefs as soon as he came back to Iran after years of living in exile in Iraq. All of them, except the two aforementioned steadfast supporters of the IRI, were systematically harassed, assailed, captured, and even beaten to death by the Revolutionary Guards and band of thugs organized and directed by the newly formed intelligence services formed from 1981 onwards. A good portion of them took part in the June 20th, 1981 peaceful protests and palace maneuvers which ousted President Abu Hassan Bani Sadr and all non-fundamentalist Muslims from positions of power. This is an important period with regard to the alignment of forces within the Iranian regime at the time. By this act, the fundamentalists were successful in kicking out the non-fundamentalists. I call them non-fundamentalists because it is really very difficult to use the term liberal for them. They pursued a policy of Islamification of Iran and conducting the war with Iraq as a springboard to export the Islamic revolution and stabilizing a chaotic domestic situation. Excuse me for repeating this sentence. All of them were subject to the wrath of Ayatollah Khomeini, who openly propagated his anti-liberal, anti-democratic, and anti-communist beliefs as soon as he came back to power, to Iran. All of them, except the two aforementioned steadfast supporters of the IRA, were systematically harassed, assailed, captured, and even beaten to death by the Revolutionary Guards, bands of thugs organized and directed by the newly formed intelligence services from 1981 onwards. I use the term intelligence services because up to this moment, we do not exactly know how many intelligence services exist within the framework of the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is almost impossible to name all of these intelligence services. A A good portion of them took part in the June 20th, 1981 peaceful protests and palace maneuvers which ousted President Hassan Bani Saad and non-fundamentalist Muslims from positions of power. The repression against the leftist forces gathered steam after the dismissal of President Bani Saad. Thousands of supporters of political groups other than the Tudeh and the majority Fadaiyan were summarily executed in the summer of 1981 and in the years to come. The Tudeh and the Fadaiyan majority, the Aksariyat, were outlawed by 1983 and subject to the same type of repression. So you're noticing that the Tudeh party and the Fadaiyan Aksariyat, the majority Aksariyat, who were supporting the Islamic Republic of Iran, who were totally supporting, unconditionally supporting the Islamic Republic of Iran, they had to face the same fate that other organizations, who were fighting against the regime had to go through. By mid-1980s, Iranian prisons were hosting several thousand leftist activists sentenced to varying terms of imprisonment. These prisoners were subjected to ideological indoctrination coupled with systematic physical and psychological torture. I would like to underline physical and psychological torture along with systematic indoctrination of the political prisoners. Some repented, embraced Islam, and became collaborators of the jailers. Some committed suicide or lost their sanity and never regained their mental health. Most of the detainees, however, stood fast, enduring pressure and pain without succumbing to the whims and wishes of their warden. This resistance and perseverance were perceived by leading prison officials and state authorities as disgraceful, of course. Disgraceful defeat in their quest to create an ideal Islamic society. That was their evaluation of the situation, that we use force, we use indoctrination, we teach Islamic principles, and then you join the ranks of the Muslims. As simple as that. Never happened. A few years of relaxing their grip on political prisoners helped prison officials to better identify the steadfast political prisoners, categorize them, and draw their plan of action. From 1984 to 1988, many inmates, especially in Evin and Gohardash, were told that they would never be released from their captors. However, getting rid of the hypocrites, that is the name the Islamic Republic uses for the Mujahideen Khalq, hypocrites. Getting rid of hypocrites, infidels, and apostates required a suitable excuse. The excuse came with the IRA acceptance of UN Resolution 598, stipulating ceasefire in the 8-year war with Iraq. The Mujahideen wrongfully evaluated this move of the IRI, as a strategic retreat, a harbinger of a crisis and weakness within the ruling theocracy. On July 25, 1988, 5 days after Ayatollah Khomeini likened the ceasefire to drinking this chalice of poison, the Mujahideen dispatched its National Liberation Army, based in Iraq, to the western frontiers of Iran. 1,620 Mujahids were killed by the combined armed forces of the IRI and many hanged on the spot before the remnants of 6,000 strong militia returned back to their bases in Iraq. It is after this military excursion that one can call it a adventurous military excursion. It's after this military excursion that the plan of Great Massacre goes into effect. The extent of documentation and information at our disposal prior to the ongoing Stockholm trial was not vast enough to let us know many minute details and aspects of this ordeal. However, as of now, we do not know why. We do not know with certainty why on July 26 and 27, visiting rights were suddenly cancelled in Evin and Gohardasht prisons. TV sets were taken out of cells and wards. Newspapers were stopped to be delivered. The same policy was implemented in other major detention centers throughout Iran. On July 28, a commission consisting of a religious judge, Hassan Ali Nayeri, the Prosecutor General of Tehran, Murtaza Eshraqi, Deputy Prosecutor General of Tehran, Ebrahim Raisi, the President of Islamic Republic of Iran at this very moment. Representative of the Ministry of Intelligence, Mustafa Mohammadi, began the inquisition of political prisoners in the notorious Evin jail. The commission worked in total secrecy. We learned only much later that 200 members and sympathizers of the Mujahideen were executed by the order of the Death Commission on the very first day of its activity. The commission portrayed itself as one of amnesty and did not reveal its true rulings and identification to the detainees. It took a while for the prisoners to realize the real mission of the commission and call it by its real name, the Death Commission. After 48 hours of interrogating and issuing verdicts, the commission moved to Gohardasht. We don't know exactly how many mujahids were killed on July the 30th in Gohardasht, but we know that the commission was moving back and forth from Gohardasht to Evin until sometime in September. The date is not known as of now. We also know that the Inquisition tribunals of leftist political prisoners begins on August 28 from Gohardasht prison. Well, permit me not to discuss the Inquisition tribunals and why I'm using this term. As we go on, we will understand why they can't be called anything but Inquisition tribunals. In the sense that we saw in Europe in the Middle Ages. We also know that the Inquisition tribunals of the leftist political prisoners begins on August 28 from Gohardasht prison. By this time, it seems the interrogation of the Mujahideen prisoners in the provinces had come to an end. It's important to know that no leftist woman was executed in the Great Massacre of summer 1988. The exception to the rule is Simine Fardin, a member of the underground organization of the Dude Party. It's important to know that, well, during the massacre of 1988, there was only one woman killed, Simine Fardin. But this does not mean that women were not killed before 1988. From day one, with Farrokhruh Parsa, the Minister of Education of the Shah, she was killed by a firing squad, and from then on, especially during the 60s, thousands of women, we do not have exact numbers, thousands of women were executed or hanged inside jails or in the battlefields in Kurdistan and other places. But it seems that at one point there is a harsh discussion going on between different factions of the government. And it seems that, you know, the killings in the 1988 is happening right at the time that this discussion is going on, and they have not come to a conclusion that should we kill women, and again, this is a very difficult discussion to follow. Women, virgin women, unvirgin women. I mean, this discussion was going on amongst the people who were running the Islamic government. The commission portrayed itself as one of amnesty and did not reveal its ruling. I read that, I'm sorry. It's important to know that no leftist women was executed in the Great Massacre of 1988. However, one of the orders of the commission that was put into effect from August 31st was the lashing of leftist women prisoners at Gohaddash who were not willing to embrace Islam and do their prayer, daily prayer. They were punished with 5 lashes at each prayer time. And you know that Muslims pray 5 times a day. So 5 times a day, they would bring women and they would lash them as much as they could be lashed. And wait until the next prayer. The same barbaric treatment was applied to imprisoned men who did defend their political and ideological position in front of the Death Commission. The carnage continued till September 23rd, when newspapers and TV sets were allowed back in prison wards. The consequences of the killing of these 4,000 to 5,000 political prisoners on the various opposition groups they belonged to was profound. Every single formation and organization lost a considerable amount of its cadres in the massacre. Nearly all the surviving active members of the leftist groups who are in exile today, such as the various branches of the Fidai movement, the Rahe-Kargar, the Ranjbaran group, the Union of Iranian Communists, or the Democratic Party of Kurdistan, or the Komale, another party in Kurdistan, have had either a close relative or someone in their own ranks or circles among the victims. Let's sum up and touch upon some of the characteristics of this heinous crime. The Great Massacre and the massive purge of Iranian political prisoners started by the edict of Ayatollah Khomeini. In fact, there were 2 edicts. One for the Mujahideen and the other for all infidels. However, the 2 edicts stipulate that all the executions should be carried out in utmost secrecy, by deception, and as fast as possible. It's also worth mentioning that the questions for the Mujahideen were fundamentally different than the questions for the Marxists. Questions for Marxists were limited to, do you believe in God? Do you believe in afterlife? Do you believe in Prophet Muhammad? Do you believe in Quran? Do you do your prayer? For the Mujahideen, it wasn't religious questions. It was, do you believe in the organization? An organization meaning Mujahideen Khalq organization. Do you believe in Masood Rajavi? Are you ready to condemn Masood Rajavi as a traitor to the country of Iran, as a killer? And the questions were in this line of making the Mujahideen people, condemning their organization, condemning their past, accepting that they were responsible for the situation, the chaotic situation that the Islamic Republic of Iran was going through. Another important note is that the corpses of the Mujahideen were rarely returned to their loved ones. Yet we know of no leftist prisoner whose dead body were returned to their family. And that is why we have well, let's call it a cemetery. We have Khavaran, and in this book we have discussed Khavaran, we have written about the history of Khavaran and all that. This is a bare land, in fact, you know, for burying, well, that's not correct, for giving the corpses to the land, to the earth. Okay, there is no stone, there is no flower, there is no sign of anything. These people were, okay, let's see, they were buried in this land with no identification. And that was the reason. I mean, this land, and the story of this Khavaran is very sad because, you know, we are still fighting, you know. We are still fighting to keep Khavaran as a sign of the crime of Islamic Republic of Iran. And for the last 30 years, there has been a fight going on between the families of Khavaran and the Islamic Republic of Iran, who wants to eradicate this piece, this evidence of crime. So the result is that we have many mass graves in Iran that we do not even know the location of. Okay. We know Khavaran, which is near Tehran, and some study has been done on Khavaran of Tehran. We know a little about the Khavaran in Khorasan, near Mashhad. We know a little about Khavaran in one of the cities of the north, but there are so many different Khavarans that we do not have an iota of information. And again, this is part of their secrets. And I hope they can keep the archives. And at one time, we can become aware. Now, we are to briefly discuss the Swedish court and Nouri's trial. He was convicted of committing war crimes and murder of thousands of political detainees between July and September 1988 as assistant to the deputy prosecutor at Gohardasht prison in Karaj. He has been sentenced to life in prison that he finds fraudulent and unjust. He has appealed the verdict, and the appeal court proceedings, he has been sentenced to life in prison that he finds fraudulent and unjust. He has appealed the verdict, and the appeal court proceedings began January 11, 2023. Permit me to remind that this is the first time a former agent of the Islamic Republic of Iran is standing trial in connection with the 1988 massacre. To conclude, the 1988 massacre of Iranian prisoners of conscience is still a state secret and will remain so as long as the Islamic Republic of Iran stays in power. Through these harsh and somber years, none of the IRA officials have revealed an iota of truth about this crime against humanity. On the contrary, they did their best to distort reality. The exception to the rule was Ayatollah Montazeri. who rode against the atrocity and bravely relieved information against the extent and intensity of the crime. A crime that has been unknown, a crime that has many unknown aspects, a breathtaking story that has been reconstructed bits and pieces by ex-political prisoners, their families, and some independent researchers. And let me say that 92 court sessions held in 9 months in Stockholm prove that the narrative of the surviving prisoners, their families, and independent researchers is the closest of what we have to the truth. Therefore, we are still doing our best to find out the answers to these fundamental questions of human rights. On what ground did you kill them? On which court? By which committee? And according to which written law were they executed? Why were the prisoners who were sentenced long ago and who had already served their sentences suddenly exterminated behind closed doors in a matter of 2 or 3 months? Why do you refuse to publish the real name of the victims of this massacre and evade publicly answering the explicit questions from people and the families of the political prisoners? To date, none of the heads of the IRA have been willing to answer these questions. The chapter of 1988 massacre in Iran is still open, and the last word has not been uttered.
I wanted to see if you could say a little bit about how many people were actually executed at that point. I know we don't know exactly, but if you could share that range. And I'm aware of the painful fact that the Islamic Republic, due to Islamic law, made the decision to rape women before they were actually executed. And if you could talk about that. Third thing, when did they start to charge the families of the executed for the actual ammunition that were used to actually execute them?
With regard to not killing virgin women, it seems that for a while this discussion, because you must take into consideration the makeup of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I mean, you have all kinds of tendencies within this regime in terms of reading the Quran and interpreting the Quran and the Hadith. Okay, so there are fundamentalists there, whose reading is very strict, and I don't know, for some reason they think that the women should not be killed, and then you have the other extreme too. That doesn't matter if you have committed a crime, and if you are to be killed, you are to be killed. As simple as that. It's not important. Your virginity is not important as a woman. And I still think that, reading newspapers, it seems that in this province, something like this happens. In the other province, it doesn't happen. So it seems to me, I could be wrong, okay? It seems to me that there is no one single rule on this. And it seems that the Hakim Shar, okay, the chief interpreter of Islamic law in one city or one village can impose his understanding of the holy book, okay, on people. So this is my impression. I could be wrong. Another thing is that in the beginning they were talking about such things very openly. Now it seems that they're quite conscious that these discussions should be amongst themselves and not to be revealed in newspapers. Again, I could be wrong, but this is my understanding, my take of reading newspapers of the Islamic people. I hope I have answered your question. The other question was
the fact that the families of the actual execution people were charged for the
yes.
actual ammunition.
Yes. Yeah, in the beginnings, this happened from the very beginning. From the very beginning, even when they were killing the dignitaries of the Pahlavi regime, the generals, the ministers, all that, they would come to their house and they would say that, okay, we have spent 8 bullets to save your husband, from all the crimes that he has committed on the earth, and he would be going to a better place, and you have to pay so much for all the bullets that we have used. Day one, they started to do that. Okay, and we have men, women, especially women of the ex-ruling class in Iran, who have written about this. We have written documents that they came to our house, they came with a bill, and they asked us to pay so much for so many bullets they had to spare to eliminate this or that person. It happened during the 1988 massacre, but it didn't happen systematically, as far as I know. It couldn't happen systematically because you're going to, bury these people in mass graves. You're not going to give any information about who you have killed. We do not even have, this is one of the demands of the families of political prisoners. We want the will of our sons and daughters. And they have used all kinds of excuses in not giving the wills to them. So it becomes a little, crazy, I should say, to say that, okay, this much you have to pay for the bullets. This did not happen. It happened, but it did not happen in a wide, in a wide spectrum during the Great Massacre.
Thank you so much for this great talk, and I can tell that it was difficult for you to deliver it. So I really appreciate your strength in documenting this horrendous crime and revealing it to us here in this very room. I do have a few questions. Number one, you touched on an important thing, like one of the questions that is being posed to the regime today. Why this secrecy of this crime? And I am curious to see what your take on that is, because I come from Turkey, and similar things, we have a history of similar things happening there too, to revolutionaries and workers' militants and Kurdish militants. and the regime sometimes chooses to make a public show of fear out of that, and sometimes it operates in secrecy. And in the case that you're describing in Iran, it was pretty much the latter. So, like, why that choice? I would be interested in learning about that. The other question I would have is, what about this organization that is the Mujahideen, that was the Mujahideen now? Like, are they still existing? And if they do, what are they doing? Especially given the revolutionary uprising in the recent year or two in Iran. And the third question I would have is like more of a, I guess, historic question about the same organization. Can you, if you can, you made a distinction between Marxists, which were posed different questions during these inquisitions, and the militants of the Mujahideen. So, if you could speak a little bit about their program, about their politics, about their ideology, I would appreciate that. As far as I understand, in a very contradictory way, both the Mujahideen and the Islamic Republic of Iran claim the mantra of al-Shariati, which is kind of bizarre. So, as far as I know, I could be totally off. So if you could speak to that a little bit, I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, this is analysis, what I'm going to present at this moment. This is analysis. It could be wrong. Okay, we do not have documents. We do not have solid documents. You know, so we just do our best in terms of guessing, in terms of making a rational discussion. Everything. But there is in the memoirs of Ayatollah Montazeri, there are certain points that may help us to say that, okay, we are in the right direction. Ayatollah Montazeri says, the crime that you have committed, and this is second in command in the Shia hierarchy at the time, okay? He is the successor of Ayatollah Khomeini, religiously speaking, politically speaking, at the time, okay? He says that history will not forget us. I'm sorry, history will not forgive us for what we have done with political prisoners. They were all sentenced once. They all were in prison and, doing their sentence, okay? And on what basis are we going to try them again? On what basis are we going to ask these questions and, ask them if they still believe in? I mean, sometimes, because it was a pre-planned kind of a thing. I tell you something. There is, again, another thing in the Montazeri's memoirs. It's a very important book, I think, to read. There is a discussion between a Muslim Mujahideen and the interrogator. And the interrogator asks many questions, and all the answers are negative, negative, negative. Do you believe in Masood Rajabi? No, he's a Masood Rajabi. He's a murderer. Do you believe in the organization? No, the organization is a gangster type of it. All the questions. Are you ready to go and walk on a mine in the water, in the battlefront? And the guy says that, listen, is everybody that you talk to is ready to go and walk on a mine in a battlefront? What are you talking about? To the left, hanged. Okay? So you are dealing, this is a surrealistic kind of a situation, I would say. And So I think that the very fact that this is important, I mean the timing is very important. The Iranian regime for so many years was resisting all kinds of pressure to stop the war with Iraq. Okay? Nobody wanted the war with Iraq. Internationally speaking, nationally speaking, no one wanted the war with Iraq. No one wanted the continuation. There were all kinds of efforts, to bring the two parties to a table and come some kind of a conclusion. So they knew that after the war they have to enter into all these dealings in the UN. Before the UN was an imperialistic organization, good for nothing but the interests of American imperialism and Soviet social imperialism. Okay, but after they accepted, after they accepted Resolution 598 and becoming a member of international community, then they had to think about, some commissions coming to Iran, looking at the prisons, all these things. So what they were doing was totally against all norms, all accepted norms, operating norms at the time. So this is my understanding, my analysis of why they didn't want. It is again. This is it might be interesting for you. Like in women's war, okay. There were 10, 15 women, Marxist women, who were having strong positions, and they were not going to say, I'm sorry, they were not going to sign anything, they were not going to say that, I have repented, nothing, okay? So what they did was that they built another room somewhere else, and they took all of them there. So when Galindopol, the special commission of the UN came to Iran, he could not see this room, and he could not talk to these women who were all, as I use the word, steadfast. This is a word that is common in the literature, prison literature. People who have stood on their positions and are not going to bend. I hope I have answered a little of your question. With regard to the Mujahideen, it is very difficult to talk. First of all, permit me to make your statement a little more precise, okay? Neither Mujahideen Khalq nor the Islamic Republic of Iran, they have no sympathy as such for Ali Shariati. None of them. Ali Shariati was very popular amongst the Muslim intellectuals of the time. To this day, the Muslim intellectuals like Ali Shariati and think of Ali Shariati seriously. But the fundamentalists think of him as a deviator in Islamic thought. The Mujahideen Khalq, they think he's a bourgeois and he doesn't have much to offer, and a social democrat. I mean, this is not my words, these are the words that you talk to a Mujahid, and what did he say? What was his contribution? So Ali Shariati is, this kind of. But the two parts, the two poles that we are talking about, I think they use Ali Shariati whenever they want to, prove something, or whenever it's to their benefit. Okay? With regard to the Mujahideen Khalq have gone through a total change, I would say. The Mujahideen Khalq that they were created in the early 1960s as a split, as an offshoot of نهضت آزادی ایران under the leadership of مهندس بازرگان. I mean, this is something completely different. They do not even refer to مهندس بازرگان as their ideological leader and everything. I'm very sad to say that the Mujahideen Khalq find their allies in the ultra-right forces. What is the word in English? No conservatives, the no-cons in the States, also in New York.
Reactionaries, and they're in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and even in the 80s, reactionary.
Again, I hope I have answered your questions.
Of course, thank you very much.
I have a question, which is, I have read partway through your book. It's actually very difficult to read the searing stories of what the prisoners went through and how, in many, many cases, they courageously resisted torture, and just unbelievable. It's hard to read the book. It must have been even harder to write the book. And you were dealing with this secrecy from the other side, how to penetrate it and break it open. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, the writing of the book, and how you were able to put all this together. And then Reiko from our store as well had a very related question.
Yeah, I also read the book, and yeah, it's incredible, the different stories and how alike a lot of the stories are from this prison, from that prison, and them experiencing the same thing, the disappearance of the TVs, the disappearance of the newspapers, and then the summoning of people. It's very, very chilling. But I also felt that the same, it was very inspiring. Particularly, I remember this one story, I believe it was a supporter of the Union of Iranian Communists, who talked about how in the prisons their normal life was studying and thinking about the future, and they were having discussions and arguments about whether they would have prisons in the new society or just have them as museums of things. It was very inspiring. They were thinking about a future socialist and communist world, and I wondered, yes, how did you find all of the accounts and voices that tell the truth in this book?
Well, that's the most difficult question for me to answer. And I'm not going to claim that I'm going to answer in a satisfactory way, what you have posed. I think the only way to write about prison, I have been working on prison literature for, 35 years, and I think it is one of the most difficult things to do, to write about prison and prison life. And it's very difficult to be the voice of, I don't like the term victim. I don't think that we're victims. I think that all political prisoners, they have made a choice. Not that, we do not have victim in general, we have victim. But when you make a decision and when you take responsibility for your decision, it is difficult to talk about victims. But it is, for our discussion, I think that the only way, for me, I found it for myself, the only way, because, it is sometimes, after writing, a paragraph, you will cry. There is no way out, Sometimes you cry when you're asleep. There are certain scenes that, cannot be, like life. There are certain scenes that you cannot forget in life, Whenever you think about those scenes, you know, it makes you tremble. So, but I think that, you know, for me, what helped me was that, okay, I forget myself. I forget myself totally. I'm writing about Mehdi. I have to think about Mehdi. I should not think about myself. I do not have the right, I do not have the luxury to think about myself. I have to be an honest person, and these books, you know, there is no exaggeration in any of these books. People who know prison literature in Iran, they would all witness that, you know, there is no exaggeration, there is no sectarianism, that if you are a political prisoner, you are a political prisoner. Regardless of the organization, the group that you belong to, you went through hell. And my responsibility, and people you know who work on prison literature, their responsibility is to portray, rewrite, and make it clear what this person went through. You can only become a little calm when you reread the writing, and when you say that, okay, I have done justice. I have been her voice. I have been his voice. I don't know. Did I answer the question or not? I don't know. But please, I really can't talk much about, you know, the way in which you write prison memoirs. It's the most difficult thing. I have been writing, I've been a historian, I have written about so many different subjects in life, you know. I have written about so many different comrades who fell. Nothing compares with writing historical. Nothing.
I just want to make a comment, which is I've known Iranian revolutionaries for more than 40 years, going back to the time of the Shah. And one of the things I learned from them is the need, you have to confront how savage and vicious the other side is and what they can do. You can't turn away from that. I'm not speaking in the sense of writing a book, I'm speaking in a larger political sense. You have to do that. And this is really important now, I think, and with your book. And the other point I would make is that part of what I learned from Avakian is, yes, you do have to confront that savagery, but out of that can come something very beautiful. But that's up to us to do. So.
What would you propose as the solution?
No, the solution is the downfall of the regime, the Islamic Republic. That is, as long as we have this regime in power, we have so many different, you know, forms of torture, so many different forms of, you know, making people suffer.
I remember when I looked at prison literature when I was helping with the Mumia Abu Jamal and campaign years ago, and it was I think it was a yellow book. It said abolish all prisons. William Upstein, he's a graffiti writer, prophet.
And on the other hand, talking about, you know, that we want a world without prison, we want a world without capital punishment,
without coercion, without killing, without pain,
that we are not for revenge
Exactly.
at all. You know, just expanding and elaborating this culture of we don't want revenge, but then have the monopoly of revenge. And looking for a better world, a more humanistic world. I think the two should come together, and we are successful when we are we show the cruelty of, this, what Kate Millett called the policy of cruelty. We have to be as much against, to me, I'm not saying we have to be, I'm sorry. Myself, I'm as much against, this policy of cruelty, as much against, talking about, better world, a different world.
Another question?
Well, first, people spoke to something I wanted to say earlier, but it must have been an incredibly harrowing experience to write the book, and you've gone into that. But just, I wanted to reiterate your courage and your resolve, to do this. I feel like, someone has to put together the guide when we do the war crimes trials for these monsters, these whether they're Islamic fundamentalists, theocrats and fascists, or in this country we have Christian fascists who want to criminalize LGBTQ people, who want to put into place a theocracy in this country, to criminalize women, make women that get abortions are now guilty of homicide. This is what they want, So what they're doing in Iran is not something that the Christian fascists here are just fawning over it, I'm sure. And they're very much in adoration of it. They want to replicate it here in this country, So this is a system that we're dealing with, but I think your book is so important because when we do these war crimes trials, we need the evidence, we need the documentation, and you're providing something for a future, trial, and for people to learn from that heroism and to appreciate it. And my question more was along the line. First, I want to say, and if people feel that way, then there's work that we have to do here to make revolution, to get humanity out from underneath capitalism and imperialism and all the oppressive relations it enforces around the world, the regimes, the horrific suffering that's unnecessary. That's unnecessary, but we have to lift this monster of capitalism, imperialism off the backs of the people of the world, And what I wanted to ask you about is, was your book already finished when the recent Women, Life, and Freedom and the uprising in Iran was already underway? Because I'm sure it must have inspired you and gave you more resolve,
No, it was finished way before the movement, Women, Life, Liberty started. But we have all been inspired so much by this movement. And myself, I have written a few articles on the subject. And this is a very important movement in our country. This is a very important movement in our country. This can change many things in our country. It can make room for so many different, progressive trends to come to the fore and change things. But I'm not going to take much of your time because of that. But there is fortunately, there is good number of articles. We see that we do not have a book on the subject. I'm sure that soon we will have a book on the subject. But people are working on this movement and trying to make a good archive of many important articles written by ex-political prisoners, women, young women, who there is consensus that they're putting their foot on the shoulders of the previous generation. And it's important to know that from day one of the Islamic Republic of Iran, from day one, there was resistance and there was a struggle against this reactionary regime. And in the forefront of this movement, there will always be men.
to say we're going to pass a basket asking for people to give donations. The donations will be half go to the International Emergency Campaign for the political prisoners in Iran and half to Revolution Books. So there were some hands up.
Do you think that the Iran government, or Iran regime, cares what the international community thinks about this? I mean, is there a place for, outside influence?
Yes, now more than ever. At one time, it was the great Satan and the small Satan. They didn't want to deal with the Satans. But now they really like, to sit with all kinds of Satans all over the world and come to different kinds of, conclusions, working with them. So it is one of those moments in Iranian, in the Islamic Republic of Iran's history that outside pressure can work better than any other time. To my knowledge and to my understanding, I hope I'm not wrong, but following the Islamic Republic of Iran politically for the last 43 years or so, I have never seen them so vulnerable in front of international pressure.
So I wanted to ask you, I don't think we talked about,
questions.
I'm sorry. This time it's only two.
I appreciate if you ask less difficult.
I don't think we have gone actually over how many were actually executed. And I know we don't know what that exactly is. But if you could talk about that. And the second thing I wanted to ask is, there's something in here for us to learn. When I look at this, the question that is with me is, how can a portion of the socialist movement come to actually a justification with themselves to support a fundamentalist religious system there? If you could talk about that.
Yeah. It's very difficult to talk about the second question, Money talks. Money talks. And then, you have strategic interests. And then you have to, again, somehow, it seems to me that, reading history, it seems that, we're returning to 19th century and zones of interests and how, to make deals with this force and how to make deal with that force and how to... So it is a very difficult moment in our history in terms of, competitions and in terms of alliances, in terms of short alliances. Well, yesterday, this new phenomenon came into being in China. But so this the second question. I think it is more than anything else. I'm sure that you know it very well. I'm not going to put myself in this situation. I'm sure that all the audience, they know very very well the logic of international politics. But with regard to your first question, even the number that I gave you, about 4,000, it is again Ayatollah Montazeri in his writing, in his memoir. It says that I have received this letter, that letter, this letter, that letter, and it says that between 2,500 people and 3,000 people were killed during this nationwide massacre. This number is given by Ayatollah Montazeri through his contacts. Okay, I don't know if this is correct or not. Okay, but this is the only number. I mean, Mujahideen Khalq, they have given a number, 30,000 people were killed in the massacre. Nobody took it seriously at the time. Nobody who works on the question of prison in Iran took this number, you know. Even some of ex-Mujahids, they questioned the accuracy of this number. But I think that we would be on the safe side to say that we do not know how many people were killed. And this is one of our demands. This is one of our basic demands. They must come and they must say how many people they killed during that carnage. I don't think that, you know, we can just, you know, maybe for propaganda purposes, you know, it works. Say that they killed 20,000 people. They killed 5,000 people. Myself, I think that this should be a demand from the Iranian opposition, and we should not give any number, okay? We can give the numbers that, you know, we have at hand. People, you know, who have worked and come up with different numbers. I actually introduced a chapter that these numbers were given, you know, during these years, you know, by these different organizations and assemblies. But myself, I prefer not to make any guess on this very important question and make them answer this question themselves.
Could you talk about what the battle within Iran and more broadly to bring out the truth about this massacre and where that's at both in Iran and globally, and also what's the impact that your book has had, including, you know, have you had any threats against your life as a part of writing this, or what's been the response to the book itself?
Well, the book was, I would call it, has been quite successful in academic circles, political circles of the left in general. And many Iranian progressives, you know, they have welcomed the book, and because the book is not sectarian in no way, and has been done in a most precise way one could do. The Islamic Republic of Iran, they have ignored the existence of such a book. Totally, this doesn't exist anymore. And this is one of the few books in English on the massacre. So we have the Islamic Republic of Iran. Here and there, you know, they have made threats, not mentioning, you know, the book, and I think that, you know, all people, you know, who work on this subject are ready, you know, for anything. But, you know, this is a responsibility that you assume, and you have to go to the end of it.
I have a question. Somebody wrote in Farsi. I'm trying to do my best to translate that. It says that by no means I'm comparing the situation today to 1988, but there are significant numbers of political prisoners in Iran right now. What is your take on what is going on with the prisoners? And in overall, what should we do to free all those beautiful souls?
I think the campaign that you have waged, you know, is very impressive. I was following it while in Paris, and I think, you know, what we are doing now, and I think that there is more, I see more tendency, even in France, you know, with different political parties and the sectarianism that has always existed amongst the left. I see more enthusiasm amongst different currents of the left, and I'm using the left in the most general way, okay, to work with each other for Iran, to work with each other for the freedom of political prisoners that you have so nicely put around here, and Nasser Mohajer, these are.
But I would just want to thank you so much for coming and speaking. The courage involved in writing this book, it really makes a really important contribution to the struggle of the political prisoners and to the larger struggle for human emancipation. So thank you very much for coming. And we have many copies of the book for people to buy. So.